The smell of fresh cedar was currently losing a territorial war with the pungent, unmistakable aroma of 2,000 pounds of unlicensed horse. Barnaby, a Shire stallion with hooves the size of dinner plates, let out a whinny that rattled the Swiss coffee white siding of my garage. And across the street, I saw Kylie's curtains twitch with a violence that suggested a physical collapse was imminent. I wasn't always a man with a livestock-filled workshop. 6 months ago, I was just a cyclist with a passion for reclaimed walnut and a clean floor. But in this HOA, clean is a legal trap. And a garage without a car is an invitation to a slow-motion execution by a woman with a clipboard and a god complex. From the day she told me my $5,000 bike wasn't a motorized vehicle, I've been on a journey of malicious compliance that has seen me towing a rusted Yugo with an invisible winch, suspending an entire carpentry shop from the ceiling joists, and eventually invoking a 1924 land grant to prove that my horse has more legal rights than her SUV. This isn't just a story about a garage. It's a manual on how to follow every single rule until the person who wrote them finally breaks. Today's story is from Derek Taylor, a retired aerospace engineer who spent 40 years designing fail-safes for systems that weren't allowed to break. After 4 decades of navigating federal regulations and structural tolerances, Derek doesn't just read his HOA's bylaws. He stress tests them. He retired to a quiet life of high-end cycling and artisanal woodworking, trading blueprints for walnut slabs. But his brain is still hardwired to find the path of least resistance through a rigid system. When his HOA president, Kylie, tried to use a vague parking-only clause to shut down his workshop, she didn't realize she was picking a fight with a man who views a legal loophole as just another engineering problem waiting for a more creative solution. The first thing you need to know about Kylie is that she doesn't just walk, she patrols. She has this way of leaning forward at a 15-degree angle, eyes locked on your property line like she's scanning for landmines. If a blade of grass is a quarter-inch too high, she feels it in her soul. I was in the garage, the one place a man should be able to find sanctuary, and I was genuinely happy. The morning air was crisp, the smell of fresh cedar was in the air, and I finally had the floor space to breathe. I'm a minimalist by choice. I sold my Honda Civic 3 years ago and never looked back. My $5,000 specialized tarmac was mounted on the wall like a work of art, and my commute consisted of a brisk ride to the train station. No oil changes, no insurance premiums, no stress. Or so I thought. I was mid-sand on a beautiful slab of reclaimed walnut for a new coffee table. The high-pitched whine of the orbital sander was the only sound on the cul-de-sac until a shadow fell across the concrete. It didn't just fall, it loomed. I clicked the sander off. The silence that followed was heavy. I looked up to see Kylie, framed by the blinding California sun, clutching a leather-bound clipboard to her chest like a riot shield. She was wearing her official HOA visor, the one she puts on when she's about to ruin someone's Saturday. "Afternoon, Kylie," I said, wiping a layer of fine sawdust onto my jeans. "Looking for the missing cat posters? I haven't seen any." She didn't blink. Her eyes were darting around the interior of my garage, performing a high-speed inventory. She skipped over the bike, ignored the organized camping bins, and zeroed in on my workbench with the heat-seeking precision of a Sidewinder missile. "Derek," she said, her voice dropping into that rehearsed customer service from hell tone. I couldn't help but notice the door was open, and I noticed all of this. She gestured vaguely at my entire life. "It's a garage, Kylie. It's where this happens. Tools, projects, gear. Garage stuff." "Actually, Derek," she adjusted her glasses. "According to Article 4, Section 2 of the CC&Rs, which you signed, I might add, the garage is strictly a vehicular storage facility. The primary purpose is the housing of a motor vehicle. I've been watching your driveway for 3 days. I don't see a motor vehicle." I pointed at the Specialized on the wall. "That's a vehicle. It's got 2 wheels, a drivetrain, and it'll do 30 miles an hour if I've had enough espresso. It's the pinnacle of transport." Kylie's lip curled just a fraction of a millimeter. "The code specifies motorized vehicles of a size requiring a standard parking bay. A bicycle is personal sporting equipment. This," she pointed a manicured finger at my walnut slab, "is a workshop. Workshops are classified as light industrial activities and are prohibited in residential zones. You're turning a luxury residential lot into a factory." "A factory?" "Kylie, I'm making a coffee table. I'm not mass-producing engine blocks." "The rules are the rules to protect our property values, Derek. If everyone started using their garages for projects, we'd have saws screaming at all hours and sawdust blowing into people's pools. She tapped her clipboard. You have 48 hours to clear the floor space to accommodate a standard-sized car, or the daily fines begin. Level 1 is $50 per day. She didn't wait for a rebuttal. She turned on her heel and marched away, her sensible flats clicking a rhythmic, triumphant beat on the asphalt. I stood there in the silence, Sanders still in hand, watching her small, retreating form. She wanted a car? She wanted vehicular storage? Fine. But Kylie was about to learn a very expensive lesson. Be careful what you wish for, because you might just get it in the form of a rusted-out, oil-leaking nightmare. I set the sander down and pulled up Craigslist. It was time to find a vehicle. Operable is a beautifully subjective term. To a master mechanic, it means the pistons are firing in a wholly mechanical symphony. To Kylie, it means a car that looks like it just rolled off a showroom floor in a filtered Lexus commercial. To me, on that sweltering Tuesday morning, it meant anything with four wheels and a VIN that wouldn't immediately dissolve into a pile of iron oxide if I sneezed too close to it. I spent 3 hours on Craigslist filtering by price, low to high. I wasn't looking for a car. I was looking for a spite vessel. I needed something that fulfilled the letter of the law while simultaneously lowering the property value of every house within a 3-block radius just by existing. I found the winner on page 6, buried under a listing for a haunted microwave and a collection of mismatched hubcaps. It was a 1988 Yugo GVC. The color was officially desert sand, but in reality, it was the exact shade of a bruise that's about to heal. The seller, a guy named Rick, who smelled faintly of mothballs and stale cigarettes, met me in a gravel lot behind a closed-down Sizzler. Does it run? I asked, eyeing the cracked windshield and the passenger door held shut with a fraying yellow bungee cord. The interior looked like a family of raccoons had held a rave in it circa 1994. Rick spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dirt. Define run. It rolls. The engine makes a sound like a bag of spanners in an industrial dryer. But he tapped the rusted hood with a greasy finger. It's got a clean title and 4 tires that hold air. Mostly. I'll take it, I said, handing him 5 crisp $100 bills. Don't worry about the smog check. It's for historical preservation. I had to hire a flatbed tow truck to get the Yugo home. As the driver backed it into my pristine driveway, the neighborhood felt like it held its breath. I saw Kylie's curtains twitch across the street. She was there, peering through the slats of her mahogany blinds, her silhouette frozen in a posture of pure, unadulterated horror. I could practically hear her brain calculating the drop in her home's appraisal value. The tow driver unhooked the Yugo and watched it settle onto my garage floor with a pathetic, metallic creak. He looked at the car, then at my beautiful house, then back at me. You want me to leave it here, kid? It looks like it's died 3 times already. I could just take it straight to the yard for 20 bucks. It's perfect, I told him, tipping him an extra 20. It's exactly what I've always wanted. Once the truck cleared the driveway, I got to work. I didn't even bother opening the hood. I knew there was nothing but a nest of wires and disappointment under there. Instead, I opened the hatch and all 4 doors. I spent the next 4 hours playing a high-stakes game of Tetris. I loaded every single one of my heavy-duty storage bins into the back seat. My table saw went into the trunk. My miter saw was buckled into the front passenger seat with the seatbelt drawn tight. 3 crates of power tools were stacked on the floorboards. By 5 p.m., the Yugo was no longer a car. It was a literal storage unit on wheels. The suspension groaned under the weight, the rusted chassis sagging until the tires bulged ominously against the concrete. I sat on my workbench, cracked a cold beer, and admired the view. From the street, with the garage door wide open, you couldn't see my workshop. You couldn't see my clutter. All you could see was a motorized vehicle occupying the bay, exactly as the CC&Rs demanded. Precisely 10 minutes later, the shadow returned. Kylie didn't even pretend to be passing by this time. She stood at the very edge of my garage, her nose wrinkled as if she'd just stepped into a sewage treatment plant. She held her clipboard like a holy relic, poking at the Yugo's rusted, pitted fender with the tip of her expensive pen. "Derek," she said, her voice trembling with a cocktail of shock and suppressed rage. What is this eyesore? This is a residential neighborhood, not a junkyard." It's a 1988 Yugo, Kylie. A classic of Eastern European engineering, I said, leaning back against my workbench and taking a slow sip of my beer. It's a motorized vehicle of a size requiring a standard bay. I've fully complied with Article 4, Section 2. The floor is clear of all industrial equipment and storage bins. As you can see, they are all safely housed inside my primary transportation. This isn't transportation, she hissed, pointing a trembling finger at the bungee cord. It's a heap. It's an affront to the aesthetic harmony of this cul-de-sac. It looks like it hasn't moved since the Berlin Wall fell. It's a vehicle, I corrected her, my voice light and airy. It has a VIN, it has a title, and it's parked in a garage. And unless you've added a minimum luxury aesthetic standard to the bylaws while I was at the DMV, I believe we're done here. Unless you want a tour of the interior? The upholstery is vintage raccoon. She stared at the Yugo, then at me, her eyes narrowing into two icy, dangerous slits. She didn't say another word. She just scribbled something furiously on her clipboard, pressing so hard I thought the pen might snap, and stomped away. Her heels didn't click this time. They hammered into the pavement. I knew that look. This wasn't the end. This was just the opening skirmish in a long, petty war. Kylie was going to go home, pour a glass of kale juice, and scour her thick binder of rules until she found a way to kill my Yugo. I just didn't realize she'd do it by the following Monday. Monday morning arrived with the subtlety of a flash grenade. I was halfway through my first cup of coffee when the familiar, sharp rap, rap, rap echoed off my front door. It wasn't a knock. It was a summons. I opened the door to find Kylie standing there, flanked by two other board members, old Mr. Henderson, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, and Sarah, a woman whose only hobby seemed to be measuring the height of people's hedges. Kylie wasn't wearing her visor today. She was wearing a blazer. This was a formal execution. Derek Taylor, she said, her voice tight with a terrifying kind of triumph. The board has held an emergency session regarding the addition to your property. She handed me a crisp, laminated sheet of paper. It looked professional. It looked expensive. It looked like trouble. Amendment to Article 4, Section 2.1, Vehicular Operability. All motor vehicles housed within a residential garage must be maintained in an operable condition, capable of independent movement under their own power. Residents may be required to demonstrate such operability upon request by the board of directors. The Yugo, Kylie said, a shark-like smile spreading across her face. We've received complaints about its stability. As president, I am exercising the board's right to a functional demonstration. Now, if it doesn't move, it's classified as salvage debris, and you have 24 hours to have it hauled to a scrapyard, or the $200 a day fines commence. Mr. Henderson coughed into his hand. Seems a bit much, Kylie. It's inside his garage. The rules are the rules, Bill, she snapped, not taking her eyes off me. Well, Derek, shall we see the classic in action? I looked at the paper, then at the Yugo sitting in the shadows of the garage, sagging under 300 pounds of power tools and walnut slabs. I knew for a fact the battery was a corroded brick, and the fuel lines were probably home to a family of spiders. If I turned that key, the only thing that would happen was a sad, metallic click. Give me 10 minutes, I said. I need to prime the system. High-performance engines, you know. They're temperamental. 10 minutes, Kylie said, checking her watch. We'll be waiting on the sidewalk, out of the splash zone for whatever fluids that thing inevitably leaks. I shut the garage door, the heavy wooden panels sliding down and cutting off their smug faces. I had 10 minutes. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I looked at the Yugo. It looked back at me, pathetic and motionless. I didn't have a jump starter. I didn't have fresh gas, but I did have a workshop full of spare parts and a very expensive, very powerful industrial winch I'd bought for a lifting project months ago. I dove under the Yugo's rusted front bumper. I bolted the winch's steel mounting plate directly to the chassis. Then, I grabbed two heavy-duty deep-cycle batteries from my solar DIY kit and wired them in series. I ran a hidden steel cable from the winch, snaking it under the garage door's weather stripping and hooking it to a heavy iron bolt I'd sunk into the driveway last year for a basketball hoop. It wasn't an engine. It was a silent, invisible tow system. I hopped into the driver's seat, resting my hand on the steering wheel. I could see the shadows of their feet under the door. Time's up, Derek, Kylie yelled. I hit the remote in my pocket. The winch groaned, a low-frequency hum that was drowned out by me shouting, Vroom, vroom, at the top of my lungs. I slapped the dashboard for dramatic effect. The cable went taut. I hit the garage door opener. As the door rolled up, the Yugo began to move. It didn't just move, it glided. It rolled out of the garage and onto the driveway with a ghostly, silent grace. I sat there, gripping the wheel, staring straight ahead with a look of intense mechanical concentration. Kylie's jaw didn't just drop. I'm pretty sure it hit the pavement. Sarah dropped her clipboard. Even Mr. Henderson let out a low whistle. Look at that, I shouted over my own fake engine noises. She's a bit quiet. Custom mufflers. Very eco-friendly. I hit the reverse button on the remote. The Yugo slowly, steadily retreated back into the dark sanctuary of the garage. I hopped out, slammed the door, which stayed shut thanks to the bungee cord, and wiped a fake bead of sweat from my forehead. Operable and moved under its own power, I said, leaning against the doorframe. Anything else, Kylie? Or are we done for the day? Kylie was speechless. She looked at the car, then at the ground, searching for the trick. She couldn't see the cable. It was thin, high-tension steel, practically invisible against the gray asphalt. I heard a humming, she stammered. That's the alternator, I lied. Top of the line. High frequency. You wouldn't understand. She turned and practically ran back to her house, her blazer fluttering in the wind. I waited until her front door slammed before I collapsed against the Yugo, laughing so hard I couldn't breathe. I'd won the battle. But as I looked at the ghostly Yugo, I knew Kylie was currently on her phone, calling the HOA's legal counsel. She wasn't going to stop until she found a rule I couldn't winch my way out of. Victory is a fleeting scent, and in a suburban cul-de-sac, it usually smells like ozone and desperate fabrication. The ghostly Yugo incident had bought me exactly 4 days of peace. I spent them in a state of high-alert woodworking. The garage door opened just enough to let the sawdust drift out like a defiant middle finger. But on Friday afternoon, the mail arrived with a thick, official-looking envelope. No hand delivery this time. This was a legal strike. I tore it open. Notice of policy clarification. Vehicular compliance and public safety. Pursuant to the board's authority to maintain neighborhood safety and environmental standards, all vehicles housed within garages must display a current, valid state registration sticker and a passing emissions inspection (SMOG) certificate. Proof of insurance must be filed with the association by the 1st of the month. Failure to comply will result in the immediate classification of the vehicle as abated scrap, subject to removal at the owner's expense. Kylie hadn't just moved the goalposts. She dug them up and replanted them in a different zip code. My Yugo didn't have an engine, let alone an exhaust system. Getting it to pass a smog check was like asking a toaster to pass a bar exam. I looked at the Yugo. It looked back, sagging under the weight of my table saw. Registration, huh? I muttered. I pulled out my phone and called the only person I knew who dealt in mechanical miracles and questionable paperwork. Rick, the man who'd sold me this beautiful disaster. Rick? It's Derek, the guy with the Yugo. I need a favor. Does that engine you pulled out of this thing still exist? The engine? Rick's gravelly voice crackled. Yeah, it's a boat anchor in my backyard. Why? You want to actually drive that coffin? No, I said, a plan forming in the dark, oily recesses of my mind. I just need it to look like it could pass a test, and I need a very, very small favor regarding a registration sticker. 2 days later, my garage looked like a mad scientist lab. I didn't put the engine back in the car. That would be too easy and frankly impossible given the rust. Instead, I built a testing rig. I took the Yugo's original seized-up engine and mounted it to a heavy-duty rolling cart. I cleaned the exterior until the valve cover shone. Then, I bypassed the actual car entirely. I hooked up a small, whisper-quiet portable generator hidden inside the car's trunk. I ran a plastic tube from the generator's exhaust into the Yugo's tailpipe. When Monday morning rolled around, I didn't wait for the knock. I opened the garage door and sat on my porch, reading the newspaper. Kylie appeared at 9:01 a.m. She was wearing a pantsuit. She looked like she was heading to a deposition. Sarah was behind her, holding a digital camera. Registration and smog, Derek, Kylie said, skipping the pleasantries. Show me the stickers. I stood up and walked to the back of the Yugo. I'd spent $40 on a historical vehicle plate from a collector's site and a very convincing, albeit expired, sticker I'd modified with a steady hand and a Sharpie. Plate's right there, Kylie. Registered as a collector's item. State law says historical vehicles have different smog requirements. Kylie's eyes bugged out. It still has to pass a basic idle test if the board deems it a nuisance risk. I smell fumes, Derek. I smell them from here. Oh, you want a test? I smiled. Step back. She's a bit smoky on startup. I reached into the window and hit the remote for the hidden generator. In the back, the tiny motor hummed to life. A thin, perfectly legal wisp of clear exhaust drifted out of the Yugo's tailpipe. I'd even poured a little new car scent oil onto the manifold so it smelled like a dealership showroom. She's purring, I said, patting the roof. Clean as a whistle. State certified. Ish. Kylie leaned in, trying to hear the engine. She couldn't hear the generator over the sound of my industrial shop fan, which I'd conveniently turned on to circulate the air. This is impossible, she whispered. This car is a hollowed-out shell. I saw you loading boxes into it. It's a very spacious interior, Kylie. Advanced Yugoslavian ergonomics. She spent 20 minutes circling the car, looking for the trick. She checked the tires. She checked the glass. She even tried to peek under the hood, but I'd padlocked it for safety. I'm going to call the DMV, she threatened, her voice shaking. I'm going to report a fraudulent registration. Go ahead, I said. But while you're on hold for 3 hours, just remember, Article 4, Section 2 says I need a vehicle. I have a vehicle. It moves. It's registered. It passes the sniff test. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a walnut table to finish. As she stomped away, I saw the first sign of cracks in the HOA's armor. Sarah, the hedge measurer, didn't follow her immediately. She stayed back, looking at the Yugo with a weird mix of respect and confusion. Is it really that quiet? Sarah asked. It's the future, Sarah, I told her. The silent, rusted future. I'd won again. But I knew the registration trap was just a delay. Kylie was going to realize that no matter how many cars I put in here, I was still using the rest of the space for my hobbies. Monday morning arrived with a fresh notice of rule change taped to my garage door. Kylie hadn't used a single piece of tape this time. She'd used an entire roll of heavy-duty packing tape, crisscrossing the paper like she was sealing a crate for international shipping. She wanted to make sure that even if a hurricane hit the cul-de-sac, her spite would remain visible. I peeled it off and read the latest gospel from the Church of Kylie, Amendment to Article 4, Section 2.2, Floor Space Allotment. To ensure garages are utilized for their primary intended purpose, a minimum of 80% of the gross horizontal floor area must remain clear of all non-vehicular equipment, shelving, workbenches, or storage containers at all times. This space must be readily accessible for the immediate parking of a standard-sized passenger vehicle. Failure to maintain clear passage will result in a Tier 2 violation, $100 per day. The math was brutal. My garage was roughly 400 square feet, a standard 2-car setup. Under the Kylie mandate, my entire life, the workbench, the table saw, the lumber rack, the camping gear, and my bike, had to fit into a tiny 80-square-foot sliver against the back wall. That's roughly the size of a walk-in closet. It was a physical impossibility. I stood in the driveway, looking at the Yugo. The car alone took up about 90 square feet. If I kept the car, I technically had negative space for my tools. Checkmate, Derek! I didn't even have to turn around. Kylie was across the street, standing on her manicured lawn with a garden hose. She wasn't actually watering her petunias. She was just pointing the nozzle at them while staring at me with a grin that was 80% teeth and 20% pure, unadulterated malice. The compliance committee will be performing floor space measurements on Wednesday at 10 a.m., she sang out, the water splashing aimlessly onto her sidewalk. I suggest you start clearing out that industrial zone. Or I can recommend a good dumpster rental service. I didn't give her the satisfaction of a middle finger, though my hand was itching for it. I just waved politely, went inside, and sat at my kitchen table with a pad of graph paper and a cold cup of coffee. She wanted clear floor space? She wanted readily accessible parking? Fine. I'd give her the cleanest, emptiest, most compliant floor in the history of American suburbia. I spent Tuesday at a local industrial liquidator. I didn't buy wood or paint. I bought 24 heavy-duty, whisper-quiet polyurethane casters, the kind they use for moving grand pianos across stage floors. I also picked up 4 industrial-strength hydraulic car dollies. I spent the entire night in the garage, fueled by caffeine and spite. I bolted the casters to the bottom of my workbench. I bolted them to the base of my table saw. I even built a custom rolling sled for my lumber rack, weighted perfectly so it wouldn't tip. Then came the centerpiece, the Yugo. I jacked the little beast up and slid the hydraulic dollies under each tire. Now, the Yugo didn't just move forward and back. It could slide sideways, spin in 360-degree circles, and glide across the floor with the gentle shove of a single finger. Wednesday at 10 a.m. sharp, the compliance committee marched up my driveway. It was the usual triumvirate. Kylie in a power suit that looked like it had been starched with hatred, Sarah with a high-end Bosch laser measurer, and Mr. Henderson, who was looking at his watch like he was counting the seconds until his next nap. "Open up, Derek," Kylie commanded, tapping her clipboard. "Let's see the damage." I hit the button. The motor hummed, and the door rolled up slowly. The garage looked wrong. It looked like an empty art gallery. My workbench was gone. My saws were gone. My lumber was nowhere to be seen. The Yugo sat dead center in the middle of a vast, echoing expanse of gray concrete. "Where is it?" Kylie asked, her eyes darting into the corners like a frantic bird. "Where is the workshop?" "Gone, Kylie. Just like you asked," I said, leaning casually against the doorframe. "As you can see, the floor is currently clear of all non-vehicular equipment. It's just me and the Yugo, enjoying the feng shui." Sarah stepped inside, looking confused. She clicked her laser measurer against the back wall, then the side. "Kylie, it's completely empty. There's nothing on the floor but the car." Kylie walked around the Yugo, her eyes narrowed. She peeked into the dark corners. "The rules say readily accessible. If you have a car parked in the dead center, you can't park a second car. This is a 2-car garage. You're obstructing the second bay." "Am I?" I asked. I walked over to the Yugo and gave it a gentle 2-finger shove on the rear fender. The car glided effortlessly across the floor, spinning like a figure skater in a rusted tutu, until it tucked itself perfectly into the far left corner, inches from the wall. "Now the right bay is open," I said. I walked to the back wall, where I'd hung some heavy gray drop cloths to protect the paint. I pulled a small handle. My entire workbench, mounted on its silent casters, slid out from behind the curtain like a stage prop. I rolled it into the center of the room, did a quick circle with it, and then pushed it back behind the curtain. "See?" I said, spreading my arms. "Everything is on wheels. At any given second, the floor is clear. If a car needs to park, I just push my hobby to the side. It takes 5 seconds. It's the definition of readily accessible." Kylie's face was turning a shade of purple that almost perfectly matched her blazer. You can't just mobile your way out of this. It's still in the room. It's equipment. The rule says the floor must remain clear of equipment," I quoted, pointing to the empty concrete where the workbench had been a second ago. "And it is. The equipment is currently in transit. It occupies space, sure, but it doesn't stay there. It's as mobile as a vehicle. Actually, it's more mobile than most vehicles in this neighborhood." "This is a mockery of the board's intent," she shrieked. "Intent isn't a bylaw, Kylie. Syntax is," I replied. "Sarah, what does the laser say? Does that floor look clear to you?" Sarah looked at the red dot on the floor, then back at Kylie, then at the Yugo sitting obediently in the corner. It's 92% clear, actually. He's technically in surplus compliance." Mr. Henderson actually let out a dry, wheezing chuckle. It sounded like sandpaper on wood. "Clever lad," he muttered. Kylie snatched the laser measurer from Sarah's hand and stormed out of the garage without another word. She nearly tripped over my garden hose on the way down the driveway, which only added to the cinematic quality of her exit. I watched them go, feeling a surge of pure, unadulterated joy. I had beaten the square footage mandate, but as I watched Kylie huddle with Sarah on the sidewalk, pointing aggressively at my walls and then at my ceiling, I realized I'd made a tactical error. I'd shown her that I could move things on the floor, and her next move wouldn't be about the floor. It would be about the walls. If Kylie couldn't beat me on the floor, she was going to attack from the flanks. I should have seen it coming. By Monday morning, a new policy directive was tucked under my windshield wiper. which was impressive, considering the Yugo's wipers were currently being used as a drying rack for some stained oak trim. Directive 5.4: Wall and Structural Modifications. To preserve the structural integrity and resale uniformity of the association, no unapproved shelving, cabinetry, or heavy-duty mounting systems may be attached to the interior walls of a garage. Any item not considered a standard household fixture must be removed within 7 days. Garages must maintain a neutral interior profile. Kylie was smart. She knew my everything on wheels trick relied on me having a place to tuck those wheels. By banning my wall-mounted tool racks in the pockets I'd built behind the curtains, she was trying to force my equipment back onto the open floor, where it would once again violate the 80% rule. She stood on her driveway across the street, wearing a pair of aviator sunglasses that made her look like a low-budget state trooper. She tapped her watch. She was counting down the 7 days. "Neutral profile, Derek!" she yelled over the sound of a passing leaf blower. "I want to see studs and drywall, not a hardware store." I looked at my walls. She was right. I had thousands of dollars in tools hanging there. If I took them down and put them in bins on the floor, I was a dead man walking. I sat on the bumper of the Yugo and looked up. The garage had 10-foot ceilings. High, vaulted, glorious empty space. Kylie's rules mentioned the floor and the walls, but in her haste to be a dictator, she had completely forgotten about the Z-axis. I spent the next 4 days living at the local hardware store. I bought heavy-duty steel pulleys, high-tensile aircraft cable, and 4 industrial-grade electric hoists designed for lifting engines. I spent my nights balanced on a 12-foot ladder, bolting steel tracks directly into the ceiling joists. By Thursday night, my garage looked like the backstage of a Broadway theater. I rigged my workbench to a 4-point lift system. I did the same for my table saw and my lumber rack. I even built a series of tool platforms that held my drills, sanders, and routers. Friday morning, 10 a.m. The shadow of the clipboard appeared. Kylie didn't even knock this time. She walked right into the garage, Sarah trailing behind her with a look of genuine exhaustion. Kylie did a slow 360-degree turn, her eyes scanning the walls. They were bare. I'd patched every hole and painted them a depressing, HOA-approved Swiss coffee white. The floor was equally empty, save for the Yugo, which was tucked neatly in its corner. "Well," Kylie said, sounding almost disappointed, "I see you finally learned to respect the structural integrity of this community. It's remarkably neutral." "I took it all down, Kylie," I said, suppressing a grin. "Every shelf, every hook. The walls are as blank as a fresh sheet of paper." "And the floor?" she asked, looking for a stray screwdriver. "Where's the equipment, Derek? You didn't have a dumpster delivered." "Oh, it's around," I said. "I just decided to elevate my hobbies." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a 4-button remote. I pressed the first button. With a low, mechanical whir, my entire 300-pound oak workbench descended slowly from the ceiling, stopping exactly 2 inches above the floor. I pressed the second button, and the table saw drifted down like a landing spacecraft. Within 30 seconds, the empty garage was once again a fully functional workshop. "Technically," I said, as Kylie stared upward in stunned silence, "these aren't attached to the walls, and since they spend 23 hours a day suspended 6 inches below the rafters, they don't count as floor space occupancy. They are, legally speaking, temporary overhead cargo." Kylie looked up. Above her head hung a half-ton of machinery, lumber, and power tools, all suspended by thin, shimmering steel cables. This is a safety hazard," she shrieked, clutching her clipboard so hard her knuckles turned white. "You're hanging a workshop over your head. It's going to fall and crush that car. The hoists are rated for 2,000 pounds each, Kylie. I could hang your SUV from the ceiling if I wanted to," I said. "But more importantly, show me the rule that says I can't use my ceiling for storage." Rule 5.4 specifies walls and structural modifications. These are floating fixtures. Sarah looked up, fascinated. "It's actually quite efficient. It's like a dry dock for a ship." "Sarah, shut up!" Kylie snapped. She turned back to me, her face a frantic mask of twitching muscles. "I will have the fire marshal here by noon. I will have the building inspector. You cannot live like this." "Actually," I said, "I checked with the county. As long as it's not a habitable living space, overhead storage is perfectly legal. In fact, It's recommended for flood zones. Not that we have floods here, but hey, you can't be too careful. Kylie backed out of the garage, her neck craned at a painful angle as she stared at the hanging forest of tools. She didn't say a word. She just walked toward her house, tripped over her own curb, and kept going without looking back. I had conquered the floor. I had conquered the walls. I had conquered the ceiling. But as I watched Kylie disappear into her house, I knew she was going to the one place I couldn't reach with a pulley, the board of directors checkbook. She was going to try and make it so expensive to be me that I'd have to sell. If there's one thing a Karen hates more than a loophole, it's a loophole she can't tax. By Monday, the tone of the battle changed. Kylie had clearly spent her Sunday night huddling with the HOA's legal counsel because the latest notice of violation didn't mention floor space or ceiling hoists. It went straight for the wallet. Amendment to Article 9, Section 1.4, Prohibition of Home-Based Industrial Enterprise. No residential lot or garage shall be utilized for any hobby, craft, or mechanical activity that constitutes industrial use or unlicensed commercial activity. Any resident operating a workshop for more than 4 hours per week must apply for a home business variance, $500 non-refundable application fee, and provide proof of a $1 million liability insurance policy naming the association as an additional insured. She was trying to price me out of my own garage. She knew I wasn't running a business. I was just making a coffee table. But by defining hobby as industrial enterprise, she was making it a pay-to-play hobby. I saw her through the window, standing on her porch with a stopwatch. A literal stopwatch. She was timing the sound of my sander. I spent the morning in my kitchen, sipping coffee and reading the fine print of the city's zoning laws. And that's when I found the golden ticket. In our county, private collections and personal museums are exempt from home business taxes and industrial zoning, provided they are nonprofit and educational in nature. Spent the next 48 hours rebranding. I went to a local print shop and ordered a high-gloss, 6-foot-tall vinyl banner. I bought velvet ropes and gold-colored stanchions from a theater supply store. I even found an old tuxedo jacket at a thrift shop. Wednesday morning, 10 a.m., I hit the remote. The garage door rolled up. Kylie was already there, her stopwatch clicking as the door hit the top of the track. 10 seconds of mechanical noise, Derek. That's 10 seconds toward your 4-hour weekly limit. Where's your insurance certificate? Morning, Kylie, I said, stepping out onto the driveway. I wasn't wearing my sawdust-covered jeans. I was wearing the tuxedo jacket, a crisp white shirt, and a pair of white silk gloves. I pinned a name tag to my lapel that read, Derek Taylor, Curator. I gestured to the banner hanging over the garage opening, the International Yugo and Woodworking Heritage Center, a nonprofit educational annex. What? What is this? Kylie stammered, her stopwatch hanging limp in her hand. It's a museum, Kylie. A private, nonprofit collection of Eastern European automotive history and traditional hand tool craftsmanship, I explained, my voice dropping into a hushed, museum docent whisper. We aren't a workshop. We are an educational exhibit. Article 9 doesn't apply to historical preservation. I pulled a velvet rope across the entrance. I'm afraid I can't let you in without a scheduled tour, but as a board member, I can offer you the president's preview. I led her to the Yugo. I'd placed a small plexiglass stand next to it with a typed history of the Zastava factory in Kragujevac. Here we have the 1988 GVC model. Note the elegant use of plastic and regret in the dashboard design. Truly a marvel of the Cold War era. Then I gestured to my workbench, which was currently hovering at eye level. I'd placed a single block of walnut on it with a spotlight pointed directly at it. And here, our live exhibit on the pre-industrial shaping of timber. It's not work, Kylie. It's a living history demonstration. I only do it for 20 minutes at a time to ensure the students, which is me, don't get fatigued. You can't do this, she shrieked, the purple in her face reaching a new, dangerous shade. This is a residence. You can't have a museum in a residential zone. I picked up a hand plane and took a single, thin shaving off the walnut. Shh. That was an educational stroke, Kylie. Total noise duration, 0.8 seconds. Kylie looked at the velvet ropes, the tuxedo, and the Heritage Center sign. She looked like she was about to explode. Sarah, who had been watching from the sidewalk, actually started taking pictures with her phone. Can I get a brochure? Sarah asked, sounding genuinely interested. Sarah, get in the car! Kylie screamed. She turned back to me, her finger trembling as she pointed at the tuxedo jacket. You think you're so clever, Derek. But a museum needs to be open to the public to be a museum. And if you open this garage to the public, you're violating the no guest parking rules. I'll have every car on this street towed. Good thing my visitors all arrive by bicycle, I said, pointing to the empty driveway. She didn't have a comeback. She just turned and fled, her stopwatch hitting the pavement with a satisfying crunch. I had successfully turned my garage into a cultural landmark. But I knew Kylie's next move would be the nuclear option. If she couldn't stop the museum, she was going to stop the access. Victory is a fleeting scent, and in a suburban cul-de-sac, it usually smells like ozone and desperate fabrication. After the museum incident, Kylie didn't just lick her wounds. She spent the weekend in a dark room with the HOA's legal counsel, refining a legal guided missile. By Monday morning, my mailbox didn't just contain a notice, it contained a manifesto. Kylie had stopped playing with water pistols. She'd brought out the heavy artillery. Amendment to Article 10, Section 3, the Uniform Fleet Mandate. To ensure the residential character of the community, all vehicles housed within garages must be primary personal transport. Storage of exhibits, curated collections, or stationary historical artifacts is strictly prohibited. Furthermore, any vehicle not demonstrating a minimum of 20 miles of weekly road usage via GPS-verified odometer logs available for board audit shall be deemed stored goods and subject to immediate removal. She'd found the weak point in the Yugo. My museum piece was a static object. It was a glorified paperweight. If I didn't drive it 20 miles a week, it was storage. And since the Yugo's engine was currently a boat anchor in Rick's backyard, I was dead in the water. Kylie was standing on her porch, literally holding a pair of high-powered binoculars. 20 miles, Derek. I want to see that odometer spinning by Sunday night, or that rusted toaster is going to the crusher. I looked at the Yugo. Even if I performed a miracle and got it running, it probably wouldn't survive 20 miles without exploding into a cloud of shrapnel and Cold War nostalgia. But then I looked at the wording of the rule. All vehicles parked in garages must be primary personal transport. It didn't say I had to own the vehicle. It just said it had to be the vehicle in the garage. I spent the afternoon on the Turo app, the Airbnb for cars. I didn't look for a sensible Toyota Camry or a quiet Honda Civic. I looked for the most obnoxious, eye-searing, primary transport available in a 50-mile radius. If Kylie wanted personal transport, I was going to give her a fleet of personality. On Tuesday morning, a flatbed arrived. It wasn't carrying a classic. It was carrying a 2023 Tesla Cybertruck, wrapped in a holographic chrome film that looked like a disco ball had a baby with a high-end toaster. It was so bright, it physically hurt to look at it in direct sunlight. "What is that?" Kylie shrieked, shielding her eyes with her clipboard as the truck rolled into my driveway. "It's my new weekly rental, Kylie," I said, leaning against the garage door frame in my curator tuxedo jacket. "Since the Yugo is in the shop for historical detailing, I've moved to a modern primary transport. It's fully registered, GPS tracked, and I plan on driving it exactly 21 miles every Saturday morning at 6 a.m. in circles. It's it's an eyesore. It's reflective. It's a traffic hazard. It looks like a stainless steel doorstop. It's a street-legal passenger vehicle," I corrected her. "And look at the size of it. It takes up 95% of the garage floor. I've never been more compliant in my life. The floor is so clear of storage, you couldn't fit a ham sandwich in here." But I didn't stop there. Because I was paying by the day, I decided to rotate the fleet to keep the educational value high. On Wednesday, I swapped the Tesla for a 15-passenger bright orange airport shuttle van with Smile. "You're on vacation," plastered across the side in 3-foot neon letters. It barely cleared the garage door header. It was so big I had to deflate the tires slightly just to get it inside. And when I did, the orange glow reflected off my white walls like a nuclear sunset. On Thursday, I traded the van for a Hummer H1 in tactical matte pink. It was so wide, I had to climb out of the sunroof because the doors wouldn't open inside the garage walls. The neighborhood was starting to notice, not because of the cars, but because of the daily fleet arrival spectacle. Every morning at 8 a.m., a new, increasingly ridiculous vehicle would be swapped out in my driveway. It was becoming a local tourist attraction. Kids were stopping their bikes to see what Derek got today. Kylie was losing her mind. She was out there with a light meter, trying to prove the Cybertruck's reflection was a nuisance glare. She was calling the police about the commercial nature of the orange van, but the police just shrugged. It was a registered passenger vehicle parked on private property. The real tipping point, however, was the neighbors. Old Mr. Henderson, who usually just watched from the safety of his porch, walked over while I was unboxing a street-legal monster truck, a modified Jeep on 44-inch tires that I'd rented from a specialty shop in the city. "Derek," Henderson said, squinting at the massive tires that came up to his chest. "Is this really necessary? My cat hasn't come out from under the sofa since the orange van arrived." "Kylie says I need a primary transport that moves 20 miles a week, Bill. I'm just trying to find the one that fits my personality." "Apparently my personality is aggressively large." Henderson looked across the street at Kylie, who was currently screaming into her cell phone while pointing at my garage with a trembling finger. He looked back at the monster truck. "You know," Henderson whispered, "that orange van was a bit much. But if you keep this up, she's going to pass a rule about the color of our shoelaces. I think the board needs to have a talk. A real talk. This odometer audit nonsense she's proposing for all of us, it's a bridge too far." I saw the spark of rebellion in his eyes. The uniform fleet mandate was backfiring. Kylie's obsession with my garage was starting to make everyone else's life a logistical nightmare of verified logs and privacy invasions. But Kylie wasn't done. She realized that as long as the garage door was open, I was winning the PR war. If she couldn't control what was in the garage, she was going to control the door itself. Kylie had realized that my garage was no longer a storage unit. It was a stage. Every time that door rolled up, the neighborhood got a front row seat to her failure. To stop the circus of cars, she decided to strike at the one thing a workshop needs most: ventilation. On Monday, the HOA's Aesthetic Unity Committee, which was just Kylie and Sarah in matching polo shirts, issued a new decree. Amendment to Article 11, Section 5, Garage Door Etiquette. To maintain a uniform streetscape and prevent the public display of non-residential clutter, garage doors must remain fully closed at all times, except during the immediate ingress or egress of a vehicle. A visibility period of no more than 10 cumulative minutes per day is permitted for cleaning or maintenance. Any door left open for ventilation or hobby work will result in an immediate nuisance fine. She was trying to suffocate me. You can't sand walnut in a sealed box unless you want to turn your lungs into a woodshop. Kylie stood on her driveway, arms crossed, literally staring at my closed door like a cat at a mouse hole. She was waiting for me to crack it open just an inch so she could start the stopwatch. I sat in the dark of my garage, the Cybertruck's holographic wrap casting weird, shimmering rainbows on the ceiling. I needed air, and I needed to work. I spent the next 3 days in stealth mode. I didn't go to the hardware store. I went to a high-end theatrical supply house and a commercial signage printer. On Thursday morning, at exactly 9 a.m., I hit the button. The garage door rolled up. Kylie was there in seconds, her stopwatch clicking. "1 second, Derek. You aren't driving. Close it or pay up." But she stopped mid-sentence. Her jaw didn't just drop. It practically detached. I hadn't just opened the garage. I had installed a life-sized, high-definition mesh screen across the entire opening. But it wasn't just a bug screen. It was a custom-printed, 3D effect Trompe l'oeil mural. From the street, it looked exactly, and I mean exactly, like a closed garage door. I'd taken a high-resolution photo of my own door, matched the paint shade to the HOA-approved Swiss coffee, and had it printed on breathable, perforated mesh. "Derek!" Kylie screamed, stomping toward the driveway. "I told you to close the door!" "It is closed, Kylie," I said, my voice drifting clearly through the mesh. "Look at it. It's a door. It's the right color. It's got the right panels. It's perfectly uniform. It's a net. I can see through it if I stand right here." She pressed her nose against the mesh. "Actually," I said, pointing to the fine print of the new rule, "the mandate says the door must remain closed to maintain a uniform streetscape. This screen is a custom-fitted, weather-resistant structural cover. From the curb, where the rules are enforced, it looks identical to every other house. It's a standardized visual barrier." Behind the screen, I had a massive industrial fan blowing. The air was fresh, the sawdust was being sucked into a vacuum system, and I was back to work on my coffee table. I was invisible, yet I could see everything. I watched Kylie through the mesh. She looked like a madwoman, pacing back and forth on the sidewalk, trying to find a visibility violation. From 20 feet away, the illusion was perfect. To the rest of the neighbors driving by, Derek's garage was shut tight. To Kylie, it was a ghost. But then, I decided to have a little fun. I'd rigged a hidden projector inside the garage. That night, while the door was closed, I projected a looping video onto the mesh. It was a silhouette of a man, me, peacefully parking a car, getting out, and waving to an invisible neighbor. Kylie sat in her dark living room for 3 hours, watching my closed garage door perform a silent movie of perfect compliance. The neighbors were starting to laugh. Every time they walked their dogs, they'd see Kylie standing on the curb, arguing with a piece of mesh. Mr. Henderson actually stopped by and gave the screen a thumbs up. Quiet as a grave, Derek, and looks better than the real thing. Kylie was beaten on the visibility front. She'd tried to shut me in, and I'd turned my garage into a one-way mirror. But her final play wasn't going to be about the door. It was going to be about the car itself. She was going to pass a rule so specific, so narrow, that even a Cybertruck couldn't satisfy it. Kylie had officially lost her grip on reality, and the board's legal budget was hemorrhaging faster than the Yugo leaked oil. But she had one final, desperate card to play. If she couldn't ban the way I parked, she would ban the definition of what I was parking. On Monday, the emergency bylaw update arrived, hand-delivered by a process server. Kylie wasn't even hiding behind the mail anymore. Amendment to Article 12, Section 1, Definitive Vehicular Standards. To prevent the circumvention of association standards via temporary rentals or non-traditional transport, all garages must house a permanently registered internal combustion engine passenger vehicle owned by the resident. Electric vehicles, rentals, and novelty transports are hereby insufficient to meet the primary parking requirement. Failure to provide a valid title in the resident's name for a gasoline-powered automobile will result in an immediate revocation of garage privileges. She'd done it. She'd banned the Cybertruck, electric, the Turo rentals, not owned, and my museum, not a primary car. She thought she'd backed me into a corner where I had to go out and buy a boring, gas-chugging sedan just to keep my workshop. I sat in my garage, staring at the Swiss coffee mesh screen. I needed a loophole so old, so archaic, that her modern combustion rule would look like a child's crayon drawing. I spent 12 hours in the county archives, digging through the original 1924 land grant and the founding articles of the Heritage Oaks Settlement, the precursor to our HOA. And there it was, buried in Section 8. The right of the inhabitant to shelter his primary mode of conveyance, be it mechanical carriage or beast of burden, shall remain inviolate. In the eyes of the original deed, which legally trumped any modern HOA amendment, a vehicle wasn't just a car. It was a horse. I didn't go to a car dealership. I went to a livestock rental agency in the valley. Tuesday morning, a massive professional horse trailer pulled into my driveway. The neighbors, already primed for the Derek Daily Show, gathered on their porches. Even Mr. Henderson came out with a bag of carrots. "Derek," Henderson whispered as the ramp lowered. "Tell me you didn't." "Kylie wanted a primary conveyance that wasn't electric or a rental bill," I said. "Meet Barnaby." Barnaby was a 16-hand, jet-black Shire horse. He weighed 2,000 pounds and had hooves the size of dinner plates. He was magnificent. He was also, technically, a beast of burden. I'd spent the night converting the garage. I laid down heavy-duty rubber mats over the concrete and set up a Victorian-style wooden carriage, a conveyance, that I'd bought from an estate sale. I parked the carriage in the center of the garage and led Barnaby into his bay. Kylie appeared at 10 a.m., her face a mask of triumphant glee. "Title and registration, Derek. I don't see a gas engine. I don't see—" She stopped. She didn't just stop. She recoiled. Barnaby let out a thunderous, vibrating whinny that rattled the windows of her SUV across the street. "What? What is that?" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at the horse. "It's my primary conveyance, Kylie," I said, handing her a notarized copy of the 1924 land grant and Barnaby's ownership and pedigree papers. "He's a beast of burden. He's not electric. He's definitely not a rental. I've signed a lease-to-own agreement. And according to the founding deed of this land, he has an inviolate right to be sheltered in this garage. It's an animal. There are health codes. There are smell ordinances." "Actually," I said, pointing to the steaming pile Barnaby had just deposited on the rubber mat, "under the 1924 charter, equine waste is classified as natural fertilizer and is protected under the Right to Farm Act that still governs this unincorporated pocket of the county. I'm just being a good, traditional neighbor. The smell hit her then. It wasn't the smell of a wood shop or a classic car. It was the pungent, earthy, undeniable aroma of a 2-ton animal living in a suburban garage. Kylie's face went from purple to a sickly, pale green. You can't do this, Derek. The neighbors, they'll hate you. The smell, the noise. But as she looked around, she saw the neighbors weren't angry. They were cheering. Mr. Henderson was feeding Barnaby a carrot. The kids from 3 houses down were petting his nose. The neighborhood had gone from a tense, overregulated police state to a petting zoo overnight. I think they like him, Kylie, I said. And since he's a conveyance, the garage door stays open for his health and ventilation, another 1924 requirement, which means my workshop is officially open for business. Kylie looked at the horse, then at the neighbors, then at the mountain of natural fertilizer. She looked like she was about to have a total psychological collapse. She turned and ran for her house, her heels clicking frantically on the pavement. I had won. I had brought a literal Trojan horse into the HOA. But as Barnaby let out another deafening whinny at 5 a.m. the next morning, I realized that the neighborhood's patience had a limit. This was the nuclear option, and the fallout was starting to affect everyone. The stage was set for the final showdown. The thing about nuclear options is that they tend to irradiate the bystanders. By Wednesday, the air in the cul-de-sac didn't smell like reclaimed walnut or new car scent anymore. It smelled like a medieval stable. Barnaby was a majestic creature, but he was also a 2,000-pound biological factory. Every time he let out a whinny at 5:15 a.m., his preferred time for breakfast, the windows in the 3 surrounding houses rattled in their frames. I saw the shift in the neighborhood's eyes. It wasn't hatred, but it was exhaustion. Mr. Henderson stopped by on Thursday afternoon. He didn't have carrots this time. He had bags under his eyes that looked like they'd been packed for a long-haul flight. Derek, he said, leaning against my driveway gate, which I'd installed to keep Barnaby from wandering into Kylie's petunias. I love the hustle. I truly do. That beast of burden move was a masterpiece. But my wife hasn't slept in 48 hours, and the flies, Derek, the flies are starting to form their own HOA. I know, Bill, I said, looking at Barnaby, who was currently chewing on a piece of high-end crown molding I'd left on the workbench. It's a bit much. It's more than much, Henderson sighed. Kylie snapped. She's called an emergency general meeting for Friday night. She's proposing the Total Residential Purification Act. She wants to ban everything. No hobbies, no horses, no non-conforming vehicles, and get this. She wants to fine anyone whose garage door is open for more than 60 seconds a day. She's going for the scorched earth policy, I muttered. She is. But here's the kicker. The legal fees for the horse defense are coming out of our dues. She's already spent $10,000 of the neighborhood's emergency fund on a livestock consultant and a special counsel from the city. That was the turning point. People might tolerate a little noise or a weird car, but they will not tolerate you spending their vacation fund on a personal vendetta against a Shire horse. Friday night, the community center was packed. It felt like a lynch mob, but I wasn't sure if the rope was for me or Kylie. Kylie stood at the podium, her blazer so stiff it looked like armor. She had a PowerPoint presentation. Slide 1 was a zoomed-in photo of Barnaby's backside. Slide 2 was a spreadsheet of the Property Value Degradation Index. Neighbors, she shrieked, her voice cracking. We are under siege. Derek Taylor has turned our sanctuary into a circus, a farm, a junkyard. This beast of burden loophole is an insult to our modern sensibilities. I move that we adopt the Purification Act immediately, granting the board total summary power to seize and remove any nuisance from a private garage. The room was silent. You could hear a pin drop or a horse whinnying in the distance. Then Sarah, Kylie's former right hand, stood up. She wasn't holding a laser measurer. She was holding the HOA's monthly financial statement. Kylie, Sarah said, her voice steady. I've spent the last 6 months measuring Derek's floor space. I've measured his visibility periods. I've audited his odometer. And I've realized something. I've spent more time in Derek's garage than I have with my own kids. And we, the board, have spent $15,000 of the neighborhood's money trying to stop a man from, what? Building a table? A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. He's not a business, Sarah continued, turning to the crowd. He's a guy who doesn't own a car. And because we told him he had to have a car, he gave us a Yugo, then a Cybertruck, then a horse. We created Barnaby. Kylie created the flies. Kylie's face went from purple to a ghostly translucent white. I was protecting the CC&Rs. I was protecting the values. The roar of the crowd was deafening. Kylie looked at me, her eyes wide with a mix of shock and betrayal. I just sat in the front row, wearing my curator tuxedo jacket, and gave her a small, respectful nod. The meeting didn't end with a new rule. It ended with a revolution. The silence was the first thing I noticed. Saturday morning didn't start with a high-decibel whinny or the rhythmic click-clack of Kylie's flats on the pavement. It started with the sun hitting my driveway and the sound of a distant lawnmower that wasn't being used as a tactical weapon. By 9 a.m., the horse trailer was back. Barnaby was loaded up with a bucket of premium oats and a gentle pat on the neck. He was headed back to the ranch, his service as a biological weapon of war complete. I think he actually looked a little disappointed to be leaving. He'd grown quite fond of chewing on my expensive walnut scraps. At 10 a.m., the new board, now led by a very tired but triumphant Mr. Henderson, held an informal coffee hour on the cul-de-sac. They didn't have clipboards. They had donuts. Derek, Henderson said, brushing a stray bit of powdered sugar off his shirt. The vote was unanimous. We've officially struck Article 4, Section 2 from the books. The new rule is 3 lines long. Garages are private property. Keep the door closed when you aren't working. Don't run a commercial factory. And for the love of God, no more livestock. I can live with that, I said, handing him a mug of coffee. Across the street, Kylie's house was a fortress of solitude. Her for sale sign had gone up an hour after the meeting adjourned. I saw a curtain twitch, a final, ghostly remnant of the old regime. But the patrol was over. She couldn't live in a neighborhood where she didn't hold the measuring tape. I went back into my garage. It felt different. It wasn't a vehicular storage facility or a nonprofit heritage center. It was just my space. I hit the remote, and my workbench descended from the ceiling for the final time as a floating fixture. I unbolted the hoists and let the bench settle permanently onto its heavy-duty casters. I rolled it to the center of the floor, right where the Yugo's oil stains used to be. I picked up my orbital sander. I didn't check a stopwatch. I didn't look for a shadow in the driveway. I just clicked it on. The high-pitched whine was a symphony. I worked through the afternoon, the sawdust dancing in the shafts of light. I finished the coffee table, the one that had cost $15,000 in HOA legal fees, 3 different vehicle rentals, and 1 very confused Shire horse. It was beautiful. Solid walnut, hand-rubbed with oil, with a grain that looked like flowing water. As the sun began to set, I rolled my specialized bike into the corner. I stacked my camping bins neatly against the wall. There was no car. There were no odometer logs. There was just a man and his tools. I walked to the edge of the driveway and looked at the Swiss Coffee white door. I gripped the handle and pulled it down. The rollers tucked into the tracks with a satisfying, heavy thud. For the first time in 6 months, I wasn't hiding anything. I wasn't complying with anything. I was just home. I went inside, sat on my new coffee table, and enjoyed the most expensive, hard-earned silence I'd ever heard. And that's Derek's story. And if you made it this far, I'd appreciate you dropping a like and maybe throw in a comment to let me know what other HOA stories you'd like to hear. Hope that you have a great rest of your day, and I'll catch you all next time.